alike for those who for today prepare, and those that after a tomorrow stare. A muezzin from the tower of darkness cries, "Fools, your reward is neither here nor there." Khayyam is referring to one of the oldest of foolishness. The foolishness of believing that there is somewhere to go. This is not your home. This is a waiting room. You only perform actions here. And then when you die, by the grace of the priest, you might be able to go to that beautiful place, that perfect place where you can live in bliss and joy for all eternity. Now, this is the primary dichotomy, the division between this and that, here and there. That is why the path to liberation requires first the dropping of this dichotomy, dropping of this division created inside you by the priests. The influence of the priest doesn't stop at the church. It does not stop once he stops preaching. That philosophy of division is so intoxicating, is so deep. It is such a cheap shortcut to understanding life that you hold on to it even after you've dropped your clinging to the priest and his philosophy. Even when you have disconnected yourself from all religious ways of looking at life, while you are not looking for heaven, while you're not trying to avoid hell, every time you condemn the body, every time you separate the experiences of the body from the experiences of your mind and spirit, you are acting under the same influence. Why all the saints and sages who discussed of the two worlds so learnedly are thrust like foolish prophets forth, their words to scorn are scattered, and their mouths are stopped with dust. Ultimately, it is life itself that makes a fool out of all these priests. Because ultimately, the reality of life and living itself is the proof that there is no somewhere, there is nothing outside of this moment to experience. Because the very idea of somewhere, something comes from imagination. It is only when your mind begins to drift, when your mind begins to gather momentum, start acquiring more colors, more imaginations, more fanciful imaginations, the ultimate end of that fanciful imagination is heaven. And the ultimate end of the absolute fear of the mind is hell. So ultimately, it is the same imaginary process when stretched to its ultimatum. And that ultimatum is created by the priest. While you are experiencing a little bit of suffering, which is a natural part of growing up, which is a natural part of strengthening your mind and body, when it is turned into an evil that has to be overcome, you are giving it more power than necessary. And that idea of suffering, when it is stretched to its ultimate destination, you will find a place of suffering. When in reality, there is no other place of suffering other than this. If there is any hell, it is right here. Your own suffering is a testimony to the fact that you're not living in hell. And you're not even living in heaven either. Because your suffering is endurable. It can be overcome, but it need not be overcome in its entirety. Unnecessary suffering. Suffering about suffering. Suffering because you don't want to suffer. Suffering because you are having some thoughts in your mind which are categorized as negative. Now just think about this stupidity. You are not only condemned for your actions, even actions are many a times difficult to control. There is no necessity to condemn individuals for their actions because more often than not, they are being acted upon. If at all you want to blame anything, if at all you want to work somewhere, you have to work on the environment. You have to work on the conditions. You have to work on the society. Even blaming an individual for his own action is stupidity. Now, religion stretched this to a whole new level by blaming an individual for his thoughts. Now, how can you escape guilt? This narrative has seeped so deep into the human psyche that it is impossible to experience all the pain and the pleasure of the body and the extension of the body, which is the mind, which is the spirit, without any guilt. And as long as you are feeling guilty, you are justifying the occupation of the priest. Because he stands guarding the hypothetical gates of your redemption. The more you are shown as a creature of suffering, the stronger is the necessity for him to be there to redeem you from suffering. It is just a game. And because this game has been going on for such a long time, we have accepted this as a natural way of assessing our state. The way you judge yourself, the way you look at yourself when you see yourself in the mirror, the way you judge people, they're all connected to this fundamental divide between the mind, body, and the spirit. When you put all three together and look at life for what it is not a doing, it is a happening. An individual is a phenomenon that is being acted upon. There are very few things that are being created by the individual. Now, to even be in a place where you can create, you need to be conscious, you need to be fully aware, you need to know your powers, you need to know what your mind is, what your body is. You need to ascend to certain heights. Only from that height you can think about creating. For the majority of the human race, creation is so far away. If they can deal with the forces of life acting on them, if only they can not drown and keep their heads above the water, that is achievement for them. So many forces of life acting on them. I mean, you don't will your diseases. You don't will your physical pain. You don't will your dreams, but they're all happening. And these are the strongest forces acting on you. When you're sick, you are suffering without any conscious choosing. And yet, how can you blame someone for their actions? If you are blaming someone for their actions, then you should also blame them for their sickness. Why don't we blame sick people? Because we know that it is a happening. How different is a thought? Why are we blaming someone for a negative thought when that is also a happening? It is not that when you take away this idea of right and wrong completely, that you can treat everybody equally. You can treat everybody with love and compassion. That is not the objective at all. You still can make the distinction between right and wrong. You can still make the distinction between actions that are helpful for oneself and hurting oneself. You don't even have to bring in the world and the people. You can still judge actions, the quality of actions, by what it is doing to the individual. So when you see that an action is helping an individual, even though there is suffering involved, there is no need to condemn that action. So if there is a suffering that is being chosen consciously, and if that suffering is strengthening your spirit, strengthening your being, there is no need to put it in the same category as unnecessary suffering. It is a necessary suffering. But what it does, when you remove this arbitrary assigning of guilt, just because a negative thought has crossed your mind, just because you have acted upon it, now you're a sinner. Now, once that foundation is removed from judgment, all blame disappears. And when blame disappears, what replaces blame? There's only one thing that can replace blame, which is responsibility. Instead of condemning your thoughts, your actions, you will take responsibility for it. And there is a vast difference between being responsible for your actions and condemning yourself for your actions. Responsibility puts you in a state where you can deal with them. You simply look at it as a challenge, as an obstacle that you need to go over. But guilt is a quagmire. Once you fall into it, the more you struggle there in the hopes of trying to get out, the more stuck you become. And that is where humanity is stuck. It is stuck in this game of guilt created by the religions.